What's up everyone, I'm Gushy and welcome to RPG Labs. In this video we're going to be going over a crit build where you can get setups for really easy crits, as well as restoring FP so that you never run out. This is actually the build that I finished the game with. This build works against all types of enemies, bosses, mobs, and is even more beneficial if you like playing a stealth based playstyle. Unlike other ways which provide opportunities to get those crits, like parrying or doing heavy jump attacks, this is a much safer option and outputs more damage since we're using a very high crit damage weapon. So in this video we're going to be talking about the gear that I'm using, which includes the weapon, the Ash of War, talismans, armor, and most importantly the playstyle to get the most use out of this build. Also, all of the locations for each piece of gear will be at the end of the video. Before we start, if you learned something from this video, please drop a like and check out our Elden Ring playlist. There's a bunch of really awesome videos just like this one where we break down a lot of mechanics within the game, provide some tips and tricks and guides to help you master Elden Ring. So getting right into it, the most important things that you will need for this build is a very high crit damage weapon. I've been using this dagger, I don't know how to say this name, but it has one of the highest critical attack powers at 140. If there's a weapon that has an even more crit power, definitely go ahead and use that one. You want to make sure that an Ash of War can be applied to your weapon, because alongside with a high crit weapon, the second most important part is the Ash of War Flame of the Redmanes. Now this skill only says that it produces a powerful burst of flames in a wide frontward arc, but something that isn't explained is that it does a very high amount of poise damage. I don't see a lot of people talking about this Ash of War, but it's extremely strong against all types of enemies. I haven't come across any enemy that takes more than 4 hits from this skill before going down, leaving them open for a crit. Depending on the enemy type, most low level mobs go down in 1 hit. I'd say the commander level enemies go down in 2, any larger and oversized enemies go down in 3, and only the high level bosses go down in 4. And because this skill is such a slow moving projectile and covers a wide range in front of you, it makes it a really safe option to catch enemies that are walking towards you, as well as enemies that like to dodge away. Also, because the projectile is pretty slow moving, you can fire off your skill multiple times pretty quickly to easily down enemies. This works really well against enemies that take a long time to get up, as you can get multiple hits down before they actually make it up, essentially infinitely stun locking them. In this example, I'm using this against a golem, which generally has a pretty low poise, so it takes 2 hits for it to go down. Because golems take a long time to get back up, it gives me more than enough time to get 2 shots off, so I could go back in for another crit. So an example of one of the higher level enemies that take 3 hits to go down is this gargoyle that I'm fighting in this clip. This is pretty much an end game enemy and a boss in earlier stages of the game. Of course, the more hits that it takes to down an enemy, the more you have to dodge attacks, but if you keep yourself at medium distance throughout your skill and make sure that the enemy comes to you, you should be getting those crits fairly easily. I've only encountered one enemy that takes 4 hits to go down, which is the Elden Beast, which is very much an end game boss, so I'm not sure how many other enemies go down in 4. Going over a couple other enemy types, giants go down in 2 hits. These wizards that you see kind of towards the end of the game also go down in 2 hits. These Zamor undead looking things also go down in 2 hits, as well as the banished knights also go down in 2 hits. Now the best part of this build is that even though this Ash of War uses FP, because of the talismans that we'll be using, we can easily keep our FP up, and with the right playstyle, we can actually be gaining FP as we move throughout the map. In these clips, every time that blue particle effect shows up, I'm gaining FP either through crits or from kills, so the faster that we're killing enemies and the more crits that we're getting, the more FP we're getting back. To do this, 3 talismans are absolutely needed. The Carrion Filgreed Crest, which lowers FP consumed by skills, the Assassin Cerulean Dagger, which restores FP on critical hits, and the Ancestral Spirit Horn, which restores FP upon defeating enemies. In this example, we're just going to test how much FP we get back, so I'll just use my skill a couple times, and after this our starting FP is at 115. Then at our usual testing grounds, we'll crit this soldier and kill him, and now we have a total of 133 FP, which has us actually gaining 18 FP. Of course, in higher level areas, we're not going to be one-shotting enemies, and some enemies take more than 1 hit from our Ash of War to go down, so we're actually going to break down this even further to show which talismans are the most important, and the ones you could actually switch out in case you need more damage. Starting off with the Ancestral Spirit's Horn, which gives FP on defeating enemies. If we use Flame of the Redmanes, which costs 14 FP, again we'll use this to kill the soldier, and we end up with 137 FP, essentially giving us plus 3 FP per kill. Next, we'll test the Carrion Filgreed's Crest, which lowers FP consumption by skills. Because the stat menu does update live, we can just compare the FP cost through the menu. As mentioned before, Flame of the Redmanes costs 14 FP at base to cast, and then once we equip the talisman, it now drops down to only 11 FP to use. So another 3 FP saved just through the charms that we're using. Now the last one we're going to test is the Assassin's Cerulean Dagger. This restores FP on crits, and as you might have guessed, this one gives you the most amount of FP, and probably the one you absolutely need if you want to replace the other ones for more damage. To test this again, we'll just use our skill, and we start off with 120 FP. With only this talisman equipped, we'll get this crit. Check out our stats again, and now we have 135 FP. This gives us a whopping 15 FP on each crit. Now this is mostly ideal when you're going against lower level enemies, but when you're going up against higher level enemies and bosses, you want to increase your damage, and the way that we can do that is with a couple of incantations. First one we're going to look at is Golden Vow. Golden Vow lasts 1 minute and 20 seconds and gives a 15% buff to our attack power. The incantation animation is pretty long, so you do want to be doing this before a fight, and ideally not during. The next incantation buff that we're going to be using is Flame Give Me Strength. This gives a 20% increase to all physical damage for 30 seconds. This also will buff our fire damage for Flame of the Redmanes and the fire damage with our crits, as we will be using a fire affinity to our Ash of War. Because the animation of this is pretty short, this is something that you can reapply during the fight if you see an opportunity. Finally, the last way we can increase our damage is through a talisman called the Dagger Talisman, which will enhance our critical hits. The Dagger Talisman will give around an 8 to 10% increase to our crits, bringing our increased damage all the way up to 45%. Next, another really important piece of gear that we need is the Black Knife Armor. This armor has a passive effect which muffles the sound of your footsteps and is pretty important to sneak up on enemies so you can get a free crit. Whenever you do get a chance, getting a free crit will proc your talisman, giving you 15 free FP, and is an important part of this playstyle if you're trying to get that infinite FP. Next, let's go over where you can find all these items. Ancestral Spirit Horn can be turned in for the Regal Ancestors Remembrance. The Carrion Filgreed Crest can be bought from the Giant Vendor at the Road to the Manor right over here. The Assassin's Cerulean Dagger can be found at the Black Knife Catacombs once you defeat the boss of this area. The Black Knife Assassin's Armor Set can be found at the Ordina Liturgical Town. Just head all the way to the back, and underneath the tallest tower, you'll find a dead body with the armor set. The Dagger Talisman can be found at the Volcano Manor starting at the Temple of Igle. Just follow the path that I show here. You'll need 1 stone sword key to open a imp gate. After the gate, you just want to drop down onto a platform right over here. Just follow the path that I show, go up the stairs, and you'll find a body right on the ledge over here. The Miséricorde, which is that dagger, can be found starting at the Rampart Tower. Just taking the elevator down and following each of the paths to the left, you should find yourself at an armory where you can find it on a dead body. For the Ash of War Flame of the Redmanes, you can find it right here on the map, dropped by an invisible teardrop scarab. With that all out of the way, one thing to note is that this does not work in PvP. It will stun an enemy for a second, but I've never been able to pull off that crit. Maybe I'm just not fast enough, but it definitely is not as good in PvP. But in PvE, it's a very good build, as this is the build that I used to beat the game with. With that, I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you learned something, please drop a like. And again, check out our Elden Ring playlist. As always, thank you guys for watching, and hope to catch you in the next one.